reason why feeding your baby is one of the top searched topics on Google, whether it's about breastfeeding or whether you're introducing solid foods, or maybe it's allergies. It really seems like every stage of feeding our kids comes with challenges and stress. We're going to help you with that. I can feel this stress even now, 9 years later. When I was first a mom, your first responsibility is to keep this child alive. That's feeding them. And you do that with your own body. So every question in the world, from is he getting enough food to why is he crying? Am I eating the right things for him? The list was endless. And I felt really alone in the process. So luckily, we have one of the leading voices on this topic with us today. We're going to answer some of our questions, your questions, in this very special episode of Stroller Coaster, the podcast created by Munchkin, the most loved baby lifestyle brand in the world. Let's bring in that expert, Dr. Mona Amin. So she is a pediatrician, a board-certified lactation consultant, and founder of PedsDocTalk. This is a global platform, almost 1 million followers there. And she has this no-nonsense, evidence-based approach to children's health. It's been featured in the New York Times, Parents Magazine, and so much more. Dr. Mona, you are also a mom of 2, I understand, 5 years old and 22 months. So you're in the thick of it yourself. I would imagine that you're put in the position to practice what you preach pretty often.
Absolutely.
You have a sick kiddo now. And
yes.
I'm curious for you, was it different being a pediatrician, or do you feel like you went through so many of the struggles that I just described? Like, I don't know how much the baby's getting. I don't know whether or not I'm eating the right foods. It doesn't seem like they're gaining enough weight. The lists, as I said, are endless.
I am so happy to be here, Lynn. Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about this because, like you said, it is such a highly searched topic. And the reason I think it's so highly searched is that there's no two situations that are exactly the same. Even between, just say, one mom and one child breastfeeding or nursing, one mom and another child, this, same family, you're going to see differences based on just anatomy, how you're feeling, your resources. And to answer that question, I have felt every feeling I think every new mom has felt. And a lot of it came around that feeding journey, especially for me, breastfeeding. I had wanted to nurse both of my children, and I got really sick for both of my children, meaning after the delivery, I was hospitalized. I had close to being septic. So I wasn't able to produce the milk at a level that I think was necessary for my baby. So I really struggled with breastfeeding and going back to that sort of, is she getting enough? Is he getting enough? Am I doing this? Is this the right thing for me? Is this the right thing for baby? Switching to formula, which formula? There are just so many decisions that are being made at a time when you're supposed to be bonding with your baby, recovering.
Right, it's supposed to be like magical. Yes, and all of a sudden, all I was feeling was stress.
And everyone's wearing matching robes and taking these Insta-filtered photos. And you're just like, this kind of is hard. And so I think knowing that it's okay to be hard, knowing that it's okay that if it is joyful, because some women do have really easier postpartum experiences with feeding, it just happens right away. But knowing all of this, that there's such a spectrum of experiences and all of it is normal, is so important. And it's something that I dealt with personally as well.
That's a relief, right? And you're the expert. So now you can give us some of the information. We're going to cover all 3 stages of feeding today, from 0 to 6 months, breastfeeding and formula, and then introducing solids. That starts at around 6 months. And then from 9 to 12 months, and table foods, right? So each one comes with different challenges, and you feel like you've nailed the first 3 months or 6 months, and then you've got a new challenge to face. So let's start with the beginning. Suddenly you have this new person in your family. You are the source of keeping this child alive. And the biggest challenge I think many women face is, am I producing enough milk? Is the baby getting enough? How do we know whether or not that's the case?
And you're right. One of the biggest hurdles is if someone is nursing or breastfeeding, that they feel like this should be this instinctual thing, and it's not always, right? It's a learning curve. And many new moms struggle with latch, nipple pain, not knowing their baby is getting enough. Whether it's breastfed or formula fed that you are doing, there are a few ways. First, diapers and weight gain. So by day 5, baby should have at least 5 wet diapers and regular yellow seedy stools. When they're feeding. Weight gain after that initial newborn dip. Sometimes we do see that weight drop initially, about up to 10% of their birth weight, we should start to see weight gain anywhere from an ounce to 2 ounces a day when, feeding is starting to be established. Other really important behavioral cues during the feeding, you should see rhythmic sucking, whether it's at the breast or on a bottle, and swallowing. After the feeding, they feel relaxed. So their arms are not clenched, they're relaxed, and they may not fall asleep immediately, but they just seem more calm. What people might describe as being milk drunk. That is a common thing that we do see.
I felt so relieved when I saw milk drunk. I was like, okay, he's happy.
Yeah, and it's this sort of just all of a sudden their body's just like, I got what I needed.
What are some of the options that you have when you know baby isn't getting enough?
So when you know baby isn't getting enough, you obviously, the first step is to speak to someone who can really assess that with you and ask a lactation consultant for their guidance to confirm, number one, is your baby getting enough? And how do we know that? We may weigh the baby, look at their trends from birth, making sure okay, how much did they gain? What are the feeding dynamics looking like? How is the baby at the breast? Is the baby swallowing? We need to make sure that the baby is fed for their own health. And if a mom's goal is to breastfeed, we also want to make sure that we are removing that milk effectively, whether it's through a baby, a pump, just so that we don't lose the feedback mechanism that's so important in breast milk production. So it's not so easy as like, hey, supplement this and don't forget about your breast. If you have a goal of breastfeeding, you got to make sure that we are removing that milk if baby's not removing it as you work on the latch, how the baby is removing the milk so that we don't get mastitis, engorged, and also we can keep reproduction as we want it to be.
You bring up such a good point. It can be painful in addition to being frustrating. What are some of the things we can do to prevent that?
So one of the biggest things is knowing your body very well, right? Knowing when something doesn't feel uncomfortable. If it's a little irritable pain, you might want to use, nipple creams, like they have various nipple creams, coconut oil, things like that, just to kind of lubricate the nipples if that's a concern. The other option are, again, talking to a lactation consultant about whether a nipple shield short term can be something helpful. Now, I want to remind our listeners that nipple shields are a useful tool when used intentionally. They can be recommended for latch issues, painful letdowns, painful latching, so that we can still take babies to the breast, but not lose that sort of, again, ability to have the baby remove the milk. It's also used for flat or inverted nipples. That's why I really love innovations like the Munchkin Flow Nipple Shield Plus. It's the first nipple shield that parents can actually use the nipple shield, but also see milk flow in real time. So it's kind of the two things that I see that parents are often, it hurts, but also, how do I know my baby's even getting enough? So it provides this sort of visual reassurance that can actually boost confidence in those early weeks. It's really about knowing your tools, knowing your body, and saying, I need to ask for help so that I don't just suck it up and say, everyone says there's pain. There is going to be some degree of pain with breastfeeding, but it shouldn't be to the point where you do not want to do it anymore and you're feeling like, get this baby off of me.
What's your take on supplementing formula? Because a lot of us feel guilty, like we shouldn't be doing this, or maybe we're confused. If I give them too much, then they won't want to latch, and then I won't have enough milk, because we know that baby feeding is what produces more and more milk. So what is your take on supplementing?
Fed is best is that sort of terminology, but I just want moms to know that having choice is best, right? When women feel freedom to have choice, it's a beautiful thing. And if that mom does not want to formula feed and her goal is to nurse at the breast, we are going to do everything to make that happen, with the understanding that I'm always going to look out for baby's health and also mom's mental health. I have stories of mothers coming into my office, and I remember it was mom, dad, and me sitting, and the baby was losing so much weight. Mom refused to pump. She refused to give formula. And I had to sit her down, look her straight in the eye, and say, you are a wonderful mother. I need you to always remember this. And you are doing the best thing for your baby. And the best thing for your baby right now is acknowledging that he is hungry and we need to give him formula. And she started crying because it was this days and days, and the baby was down 18% from their birth weight, which is not something I want to see, which means that's a concern for dehydration, electrolyte abnormalities. And she cried and she said, give him the bottle. And I went to go
Yes.
get a sample. She's like, I'm like, do you want to feed him or do you want me to? She's like, I want to feed him. And so she fed him the bottle. He just started munching it down. And it was this beautiful thing. And she started crying. And I asked her, I'm like, why are you feeling emotional right now? And I'm like, do you feel like you're doing the right thing? She's like, I know this was the right thing. I just needed you to tell me it was the right thing. And, it was this beautiful moment that I remember. And that baby grew up to be thriving, right? Obviously, we know that formula-fed babies thrive. My son is formula-fed. My daughter was exclusively pumped. They are both in a loving household. They both eat the same food. They both get sick. They both are super smart. And that's because they have us in their life, right? They are surrounded by an environment of two caregivers that love them so deeply and provide them with these resources and these engagement. It's not just about how you were fed, but it is about what your goals are. It brings tears to my eyes because I have a beautiful 5-year-old who is the most healthy, smart little boy. And he doesn't care that he was formula fed. And I look at feeding as this whole experience. It's not just about baby mom. It's also about resources. We can say all we want that if you don't have to go back to work, it's going to be a little bit easier to breastfeed. I'm not going to deny that because we know when we go back to work, the milk supply can tank because we don't have the time, the stress is there. So it's easy for someone to go online and say, this is what's natural. But what if you have low milk supply? What if you have thyroid issues? What if you have PCOS? What if you have issues that make it harder and trauma?
Let's talk about 6 months and on, introducing some of those solid foods. I went the whole puree route. I thought I was so great because I made my own purees and all of this, but a lot of my friends since have taught me more and more about baby-led feeding, meaning like taking solid foods and having them gnaw on them and things like that. So can you give us your recommendation of how to introduce solids to our babies?
I love it. And I think the first thing will be, for anyone who's not familiar, the difference between what you just mentioned. What is purees versus baby-led weaning? And do parents really have to choose one or the other? So not at all. It's not a battle. It's a buffet of options. No pun intended talking about food. But a common misconception is that baby-led weaning completely skips purees, but that's not true. So baby-led weaning can include purees on a preloaded spoon that baby brings to their own mouth. So you're handing a spoon with food on it, and there's special like spoons that do this, and they put it in their mouth. So it's not a distinction between textures. It's about who is leading the feeding. So is it more self-feeding or is it parent-led? And that's how I like to describe puree feeding and baby-led weaning. So puree feeding is parent-led. You're putting the spoon on, you're feeding the baby. Baby-led weaning is more of a self-feeding. So some babies thrive with purees. Some will start to, you bring the spoon to their mouth and then they do great. So baby-led weaning is from the beginning, official baby-led weaning, is you are not bringing anything to that baby's mouth, meaning you are not putting a spoon or a piece of food in the mouth. You are allowing the baby to grab it off their tray, whether it's on a loaded spoon like puree, whether it's just puree in a bowl and they're sticking their hand in it and rubbing it on their face, or whether it's steamed food or soft foods the width of a pinky, and that's mushable between your fingers that they can grab and gnaw on using their gums, right? They don't need teeth. So there's no one right way, but whichever approach you do go with, the most important piece of advice is responsive feeding. So the concern that we have with traditional spoon feeding is that it tends to be this. You swipe the bowl, put it in the mouth. It's like the
airplane when you put the food in the baby's mouth, right?
You're not giving the baby time to swallow and take that food in, which with self-feeding, just by nature of the concept, when you eat yourself, there's time, right? You eat, you swallow, you pick up the next bite. So that is the difference here, is that you can puree feed. I actually started puree feeding both of my kids at the beginning because I wanted to introduce some allergenic foods. They weren't quite ready for baby-led weaning. For baby-led weaning, you gotta be sitting a little more steady, being able to grab stuff, which usually happens around 6 to 7 months, but we started purees a little bit early, around 5 months. And for me, it was just getting them used to the idea, the texture, but it was very responsive. If they did like one of these, and if people can't see, but if like move their head back and forth, or if they were tight-lipped, I would say more. And if they didn't want it, I wouldn't pressure them. I wouldn't play games. I wouldn't distract them. That is responsive feeding, right? And that's something that we should be doing if we are doing that parent-led approach. Just like going back to breastfeeding and formula feeding, we would never force our nipple or bottle in their mouth. You need to do the same thing with food. And somehow parents forget that. They want to shove the food down. They want to pressure the baby, but that is just going to backfire.
And you mentioned 5 months. So I was talking about 6 months. When do you know your baby is ready? Because I know there's probably not a certain date that you should start. How do you know baby's ready? And what's the best way to sort of introduce that?
So generally for baby-led weaning, which is that self-feeding approach, right? That's going to happen when baby is sitting up with very minimal support. I'm talking like they're not wobbling, they're not a bobblehead. So they have to have good head support. And when you put them in a high chair, they're not slinking to one side. They have to also be showing interest in food. So maybe reaching for a spoon, opening their mouth when you eat. They've lost that tongue thrust reflex that pushes food out. So when you put food in their mouth, let's say you are spoon feeding or they put it in, they actually take it to the back of their throat. They don't just bring it back out to you. Those are your green lights. With puree, like I said, it's a little bit earlier. All the things I mentioned have to be there, except that it's okay if they're not sitting with minimal support. They have to still have good head control. They can't be like, bobbling down. But if they are sitting with that minimal support, and they're like after 4.5 months, you can start to dabble. And what I mean by that is that you're just maybe taking some food off your plate that's pureed, putting in their mouth, see how they do. You're not doing formal meal times. It's almost like a vibe, like an introduction, but your real feeding is going to start more around that 5.5, 6 month mark. Definitely once they're sitting up with minimal assistance. And that's where we're going to start. And there's a misconception that you have to start with like veggies first, fruit, certain foods. You can start with
they won't eat the veggies if they get the sweetness of the fruit. I do remember that.
Yeah, you can start with any food. Yeah, you can start with any food. I do like variety. So maybe one day we're doing, pureed banana. I will say that veggies do not taste as good in its whole form. They taste better that way than they do puree. So I can understand why babies don't like pureed peas. I mean, have you tried pureed peas? They do not taste good. So that's when I get back to really encouraging that baby-led weaning, especially for vegetables, right? Seasoning it slightly with salt and pepper. I encourage you to taste your baby's food before you give it.
Yes.
If it doesn't taste good, why would we expect our baby to eat it? And that is why I love incorporating self-feeding, because steaming a carrot, like a carrot, cutting it into the width of your pinky, and making sure that it's mashable between your fingers and allowing them to grab it is much more tasty than pureed carrots. And I feel that when I taste my son's food, and I was like, ugh, like I don't want to eat this pureed green beans. Like this sounds disgusting. We started with pureed with things like we were eating maybe some mashed potato. Avocado is a really good puree. It's mashed, it's soft. You can liquefy it a little bit with breast milk or water. That's fine. And then allow them to get their feet wet with that. We love banana with peanut butter as an allergenic food. We loved hummus as an allergenic food. So these are all things that we started early, just so that we can get those introduced. And then we really move towards that self-feeding with more textured foods early on.
You mentioned allergenic foods, the fears of any allergies, especially egg and peanut, which is so common. Can you give some sort of best practices for this?
Yeah, and the two biggest fears parents have are allergies and choking. So we'll talk about allergies. So you can start allergenic food introduction with purees, and peanut, egg, dairy, wheat. There's 9 allergens, but those are just the common ones that we do see. And introducing one allergen a day. You don't have to wait 2 to 3 days. So let's say we do a banana with peanut butter. So you get like peanut butter powder, you mix it in with the banana or just peanut butter, you add some water, starting that on a Monday. They did great. On a Tuesday, you can introduce hummus, right? That has sesame in it. On a Wednesday, you can introduce egg. Pureed egg also doesn't taste great. So, going if you want to do that when they start baby-led weaning, but that is how you introduce. You do not have to wait the 2 to 3 days, and then keep it consistent. Keep introducing it. It's not just about you introduced it once. It's putting it on a rotation. The idea is you want the body to be introduced to it regularly so that it doesn't it doesn't develop an allergy to it. And then that is the best way. And, if you are concerned about allergies, obviously having like an antihistamine on hand, having your nursing line on hand. We do see food allergies, but they're more rare than they are common. But I want us to enjoy that. And if you are prone to allergies, maybe a sibling has it, maybe your child has eczema, I want you to speak to your pediatrician about how to introduce those allergenic foods, when to introduce it, because it is really important in those higher risk babies, those babies with eczema, because we want to make sure that we are introducing it and that you're not fearing the allergy, that you actually understand that the introduction of it is important to reduce the allergy risk.
What about, you mentioned also choking real quick.
Yeah. So choking, parents are petrified of choking, which is why they don't want to do baby-led weaning. Reminder that if you are preparing it a safe way, which is serving soft foods, squishable between your fingers, age-appropriate sizes, it is much safer than actually, anything that you can do. So I really like it. You want to make sure they're sitting in a comfortable spot. They're not moving around. They're not running around with food. Gagging is very noisy and dramatic. Choking is silent and an emergency. So knowing the difference can really help. Maybe going on YouTube and searching those videos, because knowing the difference will make you feel more confident. Avoiding those true choking hazards. Think grapes, hot dogs, raw vegetables, whole nuts. Obviously, these are things that we like to not do before 4. And then taking a CPR course. People hear that and be like, oh my God, I can't do it. But when you're faced with an emergency, and both of my daughter hasn't, but my son has choked twice, and I have dislodged those, and I've never had to dislodge an item from a child, even as a pediatrician. I literally jumped to and got it out, and knowing what to do is amazing. And I say that because even though I know how to remove an object from an airway, I never had to do it until I had my son. And so you don't need to be a pediatrician, you don't need to be a professional, but you do need to take the courses, because everybody can choke, not just babies, not just toddlers. Your partner can choke. People choke, adults choke, at restaurants. So having the ability to know how to remove a foreign body from an airway, like a food piece, is hugely valuable, and it will bring back that anxiety down so that here's how I can prevent preparing food safely, sitting them correctly, and here's what I can do if it happens, which the risk is going to be lower because you prepared the food safely.
As you transition to 9 to 12 months, you're even more concerned about those things because you're getting into table foods. This is as a baby's approaching their first birthday. I used to actually take toothpicks and have them stick it into the food so that they could bring it to their mouth, because it was a little bit easier and more fun. It was like a game for them. Can you give us some suggestions on transitioning to that?
Yeah, and one thing I want to remind is that gag reflex is going to get better by 9 months. So parents are really afraid of that gag reflex, right? That happens between 6 to 9 months, which is when people are so hesitant for more solid foods. Know that the gag reflex is protective at that age, and that's blocking off the airway. So now that your baby's 9 months, I really want to remind you that those table foods is something that they really can do as long as they're still prepared safely, like we just discussed. So first is normalize that exploration. Let them touch, smell, and even play with food. Obviously, if they're throwing it at mealtimes, we want to set that boundary. If you want to incorporate things like toothpicks, or if you want to incorporate, a lot of utensils in play, right? Utensils are fun for children. So little baby spoons, those forks, let them play with those utensils so that maybe they'll start to dip it in something and bring it to their mouth, or load a spoon, put it in front of them, and have them take it from your hand. And you may have to demo how that looks like, right? You may put it in your hand, take it from your own hand and bring it to your mouth. But yeah, you have to model, because they learn by seeing. How are they going to know how to eat if they've never seen you eat? So that also goes to let them watch you eat. Be very dramatic as to how good food is, right? Like, not that you don't like it, but make that exaggerated face. Mommy loves eating, right? Because that's how they learn, okay, now I'm not drinking just breast milk and formula. I'm eating now. And this is what these grown-ups of mine keep doing.
When it comes to any kind of like resistance from the child, picky eating, I had some texture issues with my kids where they would just refuse to eat certain things with textures. My oldest is very sensory. What do we do about that?
So remember to do the play, like allow them to play with items even in the kitchen, off of the high chair. So maybe we are doing meal times, like snack times are going to happen maybe on a picnic blanket, right? Or in the living room, because sometimes if they're very resistant to feeding at the high chair, we want to rebring the joy around feeding, and self-feeding can really help. So rather than bringing something to their mouth, allowing them the autonomy to put things in their mouth, because a lot of babies will fight you when they feel like they don't have control. And so being like, hey, here's a spoon. And don't pressure. If they fuss at a meal, don't stare them down or beg them. You wouldn't like that if you didn't want to eat. So just say, okay, here's your meal. Step back, maybe go to the sink. Obviously, you can't leave the room for safety reasons. Don't put the pressure on, but just be close by, because you may notice that some kids will be like, thank God she left. Like, I just need some space here to explore, because staring a kid down is not helpful when they're eating. And be patient. Like you said, it can take about 10 to 15 exposures for a baby to actually accept a new food. So introduce it with familiar foods. Celebrate the wins. If they do eat something, in your head, you can celebrate, okay, but don't think that they're this picky, horrible eater. Be positive about the experience. Think about the things that they did do. They showed up to the high chair. They, touched a food that they never touched before. They smelled it. That's awesome. They maybe tasted a little bit. They didn't throw today. Think about the positives every day so that you can go into this experience with more joy, because that's going to come out in the feeding experience for your family.
Dr. Mona, the biggest takeaway for me in this episode has been just give yourself grace. That everybody feels this way. You are not alone. Give yourself grace and be patient with the process. Dr. Mona, this has been incredible. So much information for us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was an awesome conversation.
As we were discussing, breastfeeding comes with so many challenges, being uncertain about the amount of milk your baby is getting, nipple soreness, and so much more. Munchkin's Flow can help. Here is Shah, a first-time mom, talking about her experience with Flow.
I always knew I wanted to breastfeed. I knew in my heart it was something that I could do, and I wanted to commit to it for my son and selfishly for me to have that experience and that bond. The Flow nipple shield came into my life at 5 weeks, right when I was so defeated, because I felt like my journey was over. And to see him just pop onto the Flow shield, I started seeing how much milk was coming out, and he was able to regulate it. And then it pumps through this little heart. So you can see how much he's getting, and he was able very early on to take control. The Flow shield literally came at the point where I didn't know if I would go left or right with breastfeeding. And it saved me. It's not a shortcut. It's not taking away from the bonding. It's just a little help for you and your baby while you're figuring it all out.
I hope you got something out of this episode on feeding, because I certainly did. If you have a topic or questions, just reach out to us at podcast@munchkin.com. Munchkin invites you to help plant 1 million trees a year. Since 2016, Munchkin has planted over 5 million sproutlings in some of the most impoverished countries through their partnership with Trees for the Future. Together, they are on a mission to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere, 1 million saplings at a time. And now it's time for your moment of calm. You deserve it. Today, we are taking an early morning stroll through a peaceful stretch of woods in New England. Gentle sunlight peeks through the leaves of maple and oak trees, and songs of robins, cardinals, and sparrows fill the air. Enjoy.